My family looked at me with pity in their eyes. I was just a failure in a modest dress. They gently suggested I might be more comfortable waiting at the bar, away from the spotlight. But what they didn't know was this: I wasn't just a guest. I owned the restaurant. And what happened next they'll remember for the rest of their lives. My name's Natalie Carter, and I recently turned 34. I couldn't wait to celebrate my dad's 67th birthday, especially since it was happening at BX, the city's most exclusive restaurant. My siblings have always been obsessed with image and achievement, while I've taken a very different route. What they didn't realize was that I'd been quietly keeping my real profession a secret for years. Wearing a simple blouse and understated jewelry, I was about to stand out in a room filled with designer labels, but not for the reasons they thought. Before I get into what happened that night, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if stories about standing your ground resonate with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life moments that just might spark something in you. I grew up in what most would call a comfortably upper-middle-class family. But over time, appearances and social standing became the center of everything. My dad, Alan Carter, built his success from the ground up, literally. He was the son of a factory worker and a waitress, and through grit and relentless work, he created a thriving construction business. My mom, Linda Carter, came from a similar background, though you wouldn't know it from the way she presented herself once things took off. As soon as my dad's company started booming, she fully leaned into her new role as a polished socialite, networking with the right people and carefully curating our family's public image. Then there were my siblings. My older sister Vanessa was the family's shining star from the very beginning. She graduated with honors from Stanford Law and landed a high-profile job at Ellison, Blake & Rowe, one of the top law firms in the country. Vanessa made sure no one ever forgot her credentials, managing to slip Harvard into almost every conversation and treating her luxury wardrobe like a badge of honor. My brother Brandon took a similar path, carving out a career as a cosmetic surgeon for wealthy clients and public figures. Brandon, if anything, was even more showy than Vanessa, always flaunting a new sports car or some exotic vacation on social media. For him, value was measured in price tags and how many people wished they had what he did. And then there was me. I never quite fit the mold my family admired. While they thrived in social settings and loved attention, I was more introspective and focused on what truly mattered to me. I loved books, creativity, and exploring how the world worked beyond just surface-level success. That difference between us was obvious early on. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" was something I heard from my mom far too often. "Look at Vanessa's perfect grades. Look at who she's connecting with," she'd say with pride and a not-so-subtle jab. Even though I felt out of place, I still tried to walk the path my family expected of me. I earned a business degree from a respected university, though it wasn't Ivy League, which was strike one in their eyes. After college, I landed a job at a big corporation and began climbing the ladder they had laid out for me. But 3 years in, I felt completely disconnected. The work had no purpose for me, and the office politics were exhausting. I couldn't imagine spending decades there just to please someone else. So I made the choice to leave. That decision changed how my family saw me almost overnight. "You had so much potential," my mom sighed when I broke the news. "What are we supposed to tell our friends?" she added. My dad, who once had been my biggest cheerleader growing up, didn't say a word. But the look on his face said enough. What they didn't know, what I chose not to tell them, was what I did next. While they believed I had taken a job as an assistant manager at a small bookstore, a role they considered beneath me, I was actually building something far bigger. I had poured my savings and energy into launching an edtech startup called BrightPath. The company focused on creating user-friendly, innovative tools for under-resourced schools and students who often get left behind in today's digital world. I still remember our last big family holiday before my dad's birthday dinner. It was Christmas at my parents' house. We were sitting around the tree exchanging gifts. "This is lovely, Natalie," my mom said with a tight smile, unwrapping the cashmere scarf I'd bought her. "Very thoughtful. Must have cost a pretty penny for someone in your position." Vanessa gave a smug grin. "What was that, an entire month's salary at the bookstore, Nat?" I did my best to stay calm. "Some people find meaning in helping others, not just chasing money," I replied. Brandon let out a laugh. "That's what people say when they can't earn much. It's called rationalizing." My dad stayed quiet, occasionally checking his watch like he had someplace more important to be. What none of them realized was that BrightPath had just secured a major round of funding. The company had recently been valued at over $95 million. The bookstore gig? Just the cover, a way to stay connected to literature while running my startup quietly behind the scenes. I lived in a modest but cozy apartment, drove a dependable car, and kept my lifestyle low-key on purpose. So why keep my success from them? Part of it was a test. I needed to know whether they could accept me for who I was, not what I had. I wanted relationships that went deeper than image and achievement. But it was also a form of self-preservation. I'd watched how money and prestige had changed the people closest to me, and I didn't want to go down that path. My relationship with my dad had become especially complex over the years. As a kid, we were close. He used to take me fishing every Saturday morning, just the two of us. He'd tell me stories from his childhood and the lessons he had to learn the hard way. But as his company expanded and our family's social ambitions grew, my dad started to drift. He became more concerned with appearances and the people he associated with. The man who once told me that integrity mattered more than income now seemed to evaluate everyone, including his kids, based on their status and earnings. About 4 months before his birthday, my dad had a mild health scare. Thankfully, he bounced back quickly, but the whole thing shook me. Despite the tension between us, I still cared deeply about him, and I wasn't ready to lose him. So I decided to make an effort to reconnect, starting with his birthday dinner. What I didn't expect was how that night would take such an unexpected turn. The morning of the dinner arrived, and with it came a strange mix of nerves and hope. I stood in front of my closet, mentally debating what to wear. I could finally drop the act and show up in a designer dress that screamed success, something my siblings would spot in a heartbeat. And I'll be honest, part of me was tempted. But doing that would go against everything I'd worked so hard to keep private. So I chose a different route. A classic black dress, elegant, well-tailored, but not flashy. To anyone focused on status, it would just look fine. I added a pair of pearl earrings that once belonged to my grandmother and a slim silver bracelet. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who looked polished and appropriate, but not someone who screamed CEO. As I touched up my lipstick, my phone buzzed. It was Jenna, my best friend from college, and one of the very few people who actually knew the truth about my company and my family dynamic. "Ready for tonight's grand performance?" she joked as soon as I answered. I sighed. As ready as I'll ever be. "Sometimes I wonder if I should just be honest and lay it all out there," I admitted. "You know how I feel," Jenna replied. "It's kind of wild that you've kept this under wraps for so long, but I do get it." She paused, then added, "Just remember, you've got nothing to prove to them. You've built something meaningful, something that's actually changing lives." Her words made me smile. I was grateful to have her in my corner. The year before at the same dinner, Brandon spent 20 minutes bragging about a procedure he did for a public figure. And Vanessa cut him off just to talk about her new promotion. Not one of them asked me a single question about what was going on in my life. "Well, maybe this year will be different," Jenna offered, though her voice hinted she wasn't holding her breath. After we ended the call, I carefully wrapped my dad's gift, a first edition of his favorite Hemingway novel. It had taken me months to find and cost more than I'd usually spend on a present, but I knew they'd see it as just another sign of my supposed financial limits, especially compared to whatever luxury items my siblings brought. Bellagio was in the heart of Midtown, perched on the top floor of one of the city's most iconic towers. I had been there many times, usually when hosting potential investors or partners for BrightPath. With its sweeping skyline views, exceptional service, and a celebrated chef, it was the perfect place to leave a lasting impression. Which of course made it the obvious pick for my dad's birthday celebration. What my family didn't know was that the staff at Bellagio knew me well. My company had held several charity events there, and I had a friendly relationship with Lorenzo, the owner, and most of the team. I arrived about 15 minutes early, wanting a moment to gather myself before facing everyone. As the elevator doors opened into the sleek, warmly lit foyer, I was greeted by Camille, the head hostess. "Ms. Carter, so nice to see you again," she said with a genuine smile. "I'm here for my father's birthday," I told her. "It should be under Carter." She checked the reservation and nodded. "Of course. The private room has been prepared just as requested." Then she paused, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "I didn't realize this was your family's event. Lorenzo will want to say hello." "Actually, Camille," I said gently, "I'd appreciate it if you and the team kept things low-key tonight. My family, they don't really know about the company. Or anything really. It's kind of a long story." Camille raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Understood, Miss Carter. We'll be discreet." I took a seat at the bar and ordered a sparkling water. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out below, its light slowly flickering on as the sun began to dip. The view always had a way of grounding me, a quiet reminder that life was so much bigger than my family's expectations. About 20 minutes later, I saw them arrive, My parents came in first, my mom in a gown that clearly cost a fortune, accessorized with statement jewelry, and my dad in a perfectly tailored suit, looking sharp but tired. Vanessa and her husband Kevin followed, dressed like they'd just stepped out of a fashion campaign. Brandon strolled in last, making a point to hand his car keys to the valet just loud enough for everyone nearby to admire his latest luxury car. I exhaled slowly, grabbed the gift, and made my way over. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said with a smile, giving him a hug and handing him the wrapped book. He hugged me back, but it felt a little stiff. "Natalie, thanks for coming," he said, already glancing over at a nearby group of his business contacts who had just arrived. My mom gave me a once-over and leaned in. "Couldn't you have put in a little more effort for your father's big day?" she whispered. "That dress feels a bit too simple for tonight, don't you think?" "Good to see you too, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone light. Vanessa greeted me with an air kiss and a quick jab. "Wow, Nat, even the hostesses here are dressed better than you. Try not to be an embarrassment in front of Dad's guests, okay?" Brandon was the last to greet me, patting my shoulder with that exaggerated friendliness he used when he felt superior. "Still going for that budget look, huh, baby sister?" He grinned. "If you ever want tips on how to grow that little paycheck into something that could buy decent clothes, you know where to find me." I forced a smile, already feeling that familiar mix of frustration and sadness that always came with these family get-togethers. My dad was now completely absorbed in greeting his business guests, barely sparing me a glance. I stood off to the side, watching as my family effortlessly worked the room, charming everyone in sight. It wasn't a new feeling, just the same familiar sense of being the outsider, even at my own father's celebration. After about 20 minutes of small talk in the reception area, the maitre d' approached my father. "Mr. Carter, your private dining room is ready. Please follow me," he said. My family and a dozen or so of my father's associates started moving toward the back of the restaurant in a well-dressed group. I quietly followed behind, holding my small clutch tightly, already sensing the usual feeling of being more of an obligation than a true guest. As we neared the private room, Vanessa suddenly turned and pulled me aside, her manicured fingers wrapping around my arm just a bit too firmly. "Natalie," she said under her breath, though still loud enough for others nearby to catch, "don't you think you're a little underdressed for a place like this? It's Bellagio, for goodness sake." I glanced down at my simple black dress. "I think I look just fine, Vanessa. It's Dad's birthday, not a runway show." Her face tightened. "This dinner is costing nearly $200 each. Can you even afford to contribute to Dad's gift?" She crossed her arms. "Brandon and I each pitched in $7,500 for a golf trip to New Zealand." Before I could respond, Brandon strolled over with a champagne glass in hand. "Is something wrong?" he asked casually. "They're about to serve." "I'm just wondering if Natalie feels comfortable in a place like this," Vanessa said with a tone that sounded more fake concern than sincere. "The menu doesn't even show prices." Brandon shot me that familiar patronizing look I knew all too well. "Oh, don't worry, if little Nat's short on cash, I can cover her meal. That's what family's for, right?" He chuckled, glancing around to make sure everyone heard his generosity. Then my mom walked over, clearly curious about the delay. "What's going on?" "Everyone's waiting," she said with a frown. "Nothing, Mom," I said, trying to brush it off and head inside. "Let's just go in." But she gently held me back and lowered her voice. "Maybe it would be better if you waited in the bar until dinner's over," she said softly. "Some of your father's important clients are here tonight, and the spotlight should really stay on him, not on." She motioned vaguely toward my outfit. A wave of embarrassment and quiet frustration rose in my chest. "You want me to miss Dad's birthday dinner because you don't like how I'm dressed?" "Don't be so sensitive," Vanessa interjected. "We're actually thinking of you. It might feel a bit overwhelming tonight with so many big names here." Trying to break the tension, I attempted a joke. "Last I checked, eating cake didn't require a net worth." Nobody laughed. Instead, Vanessa actually stepped in front of the doorway, blocking me. "This evening's kind of centered around people in a certain stage of their careers," she said sharply. "This place might feel a bit different from your usual scene." Brandon chimed in with a nod. "Seriously, Nat, you might feel more comfortable in a place that's a little more relaxed." He and Vanessa shared a laugh like it was the best punchline of the night. That's when I noticed the heads starting to turn. Other diners had begun to watch, and even a few of my father's business guests were clearly aware of the scene. My dad? He stayed where he was, deep in conversation, either unaware or unwilling to get involved. Honestly, the judgment wasn't even the worst part, it was how public it all felt. It was like feeling quietly overlooked, as if I were fading into the background by the second. My throat tightened, and for a split second, I thought tears might actually come, a promise I'd made to myself not to break in front of them. Then I saw my mother casually turn away when someone from her Heritage Grove Club looked over curiously. "Oh, just someone who got lost," I heard her say with a polite, dismissive laugh. That moment stung more than I expected. Despite everything, I had still held on to the hope that, underneath all the image obsession, my family still cared about who I was as a person. But that hope now felt naive, almost embarrassing. A flood of old memories hit me. Sitting at the kids' table long after Vanessa and Brandon were allowed at the adults' one. My academic achievements being brushed aside while theirs were celebrated with parties and praise. And being introduced as our other daughter with no mention of anything I'd actually done. I was so lost in those thoughts that I barely noticed the man in uniform approach. A security guard, drawn by the tension, stepped in. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, calm but firm. Vanessa turned to him, flashing a polished smile. "No issues. My sister was just leaving." Her tone implied she thought he might quietly lead me away. The last detail that made the exclusion feel complete. I felt a chill rise under my skin as my hands began to shake slightly. I gripped my purse tighter to steady them. Time seemed to slow down, Brandon's smug grin, my mother avoiding eye contact, and my father still turned away, fully engaged with his guests. The guard looked at me more closely then, and something shifted. His face changed from blank professionalism to recognition. "Miss Carter," he said. Then, giving me a respectful nod, he added, "Madam CEO, your usual table is always ready if you prefer." Everything went still. I could feel the silence ripple across the room as my family tried to process what they had just heard. Before any of them could speak, the restaurant manager hurried over with concern written all over his face. "Miss Carter," he said warmly, addressing me directly. "We weren't expecting you to be with your family tonight. Are you all right?" The tone in his voice made it clear I wasn't just another guest. I was someone they valued. Vanessa's jaw dropped as she looked between me and the manager, struggling to understand what was happening. Brandon's grin? Completely frozen. Brandon narrowed his eyes, clearly trying to piece together what was going on. The situation took another turn when Marcel, the head chef, stepped out of the kitchen in full uniform and made a beeline toward our group. "Miss Carter, what a pleasure to see you again," he said, smiling brightly. "I've been working on a new version of that truffle risotto you liked last time. I'd be honored to prepare it for you and your family tonight." My mother's expression was shifting rapidly, going from awkward to confused to something calculating in just a few seconds. At last, my father turned from his group of guests, drawn by the growing attention, and looked toward us with genuine surprise. "Thank you, Marcel," I replied calmly. "That sounds wonderful." Just then, Lorenzo, the owner of Bellagio, appeared, completing the lineup of staff now gathered around me. "Natalie," he greeted warmly. "If I had known you'd be dining with us tonight, I would have reserved the private balcony for you and your guests." Then he turned toward my stunned relatives. "Your daughter hosted one of our most successful charity events just last month, raised nearly $3 million to support educational programs in underserved areas." I smiled gently. "Actually, these are my parents and my siblings." Lorenzo looked puzzled for a moment. "But when you acquired the building the year before," he said slowly, "you mentioned it was an investment unrelated to family." And just like that, the truth landed. Not only was I a familiar face to the staff, not only was I the founder of a well-known company, but I also owned the very building that housed Bellagio, one of the most valuable properties in the entire city. I watched the entire dynamic shift right in front of me. Vanessa's complexion had gone pale. Brandon straightened his posture, his expression changing from smug to strategic. My mother looked like she was trying to stay upright. And my father just stood there staring at me as if he were truly seeing me for the first time in years. The wave of emotion that hit me was mixed. Yes, there was some quiet satisfaction in watching their reactions. After years of feeling quietly left out and overlooked, as though my voice didn't carry weight, it felt validating, even if just for a moment. But beneath that, there was something heavier. It hurt that it took this, a display of money and influence, for them to finally look at me differently. The test I had unintentionally set, wondering if they could ever value me just for who I am, had failed. "I think there's been a little confusion," I said steadily. "I'd still love to join the birthday celebration if there's a seat for me." Vanessa, always quick to adapt, instantly switched tones. "Of course you're welcome. We were just joking around, right, Brandon?" Brandon jumped in with a too eager nod. "Absolutely. Just our way of teasing. You know how we are. My mom had already slid her arm through mine, smiling like we were lifelong best friends. Oh, sweetheart, you should have told us. We had no idea about your business. We thought. I know what you thought, I said softly, slipping my arm free. And that's exactly why I didn't tell you. Sensing the shift, Lorenzo stepped in smoothly. The Carter party's private room is ready, he said with a warm smile. Shall I escort you all? Yes, thank you, I answered. We began walking toward the dining room, but this time I was leading the way. No longer trailing behind the group, I was now at the front, and everyone knew it. As we moved through the restaurant, I made a conscious choice. I could have rubbed it in, thrown their earlier words back at them and let them stew in it. Or I could rise above it, for my own peace and out of the love I still, in some small way, held for them. I chose the second option. The staff led us to what everyone at Bellagio recognized as my usual table, the most coveted one in the restaurant, with sweeping views of the city's skyline. My family followed silently, the usual competition for attention and seating strangely absent. It was clear they were still processing what they had just learned about the so-called disappointment in the family. As we sat down, I noticed my father watching me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, his eyes weren't glazed with distraction or disinterest. There was something else there, curiosity maybe. A kind of searching. I wasn't sure if it meant real change or just a temporary shift, but it was something. The private dining room was everything you'd expect from a place like Bellagio. Soft, golden light from crystal chandeliers shimmered across the white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a glowing skyline. A string quartet played quietly in the background. As we settled in, I noticed where I'd been placed, no longer at the end of the table but just a seat away from my father. Menus were presented with care, each bound in soft leather, and the waitstaff described the specials with expert polish. Across the table, I saw Vanessa position herself next to one of my father's wealthiest clients, already angling for an opportunity. On the other side, Brandon was doing the same. Some things never change. So, Natalie, Vanessa said, her voice a touch too loud. Tell everyone about your company. I've always been so proud of my brilliant sister. I raised an eyebrow. Just an hour ago, she was blocking me from entering the room. Now she wanted to play the supportive sibling? Yes, do tell, Brandon added, his tone overly cheerful. I always knew you were working on something cool. All that secrecy so intriguing. He gave a forced laugh. Meanwhile, my mother had launched into a completely made-up story to the woman sitting next to her. She gets that creative spirit from me, she was saying. I've always encouraged her to think outside the box. The entire thing felt surreal. The same people who had just been ashamed to be seen with me were now suddenly eager to align themselves with my accomplishments. If it hadn't been so transparent, it might have been funny. Throughout the appetizer course, I answered their questions about Brightpath, but I kept my responses short and to the point. Yes, I started the company 6 years ago. Yes, we focus on making educational tools for schools with limited resources. And no, I hadn't gone public with my role by choice. As the main course was served, several guests from nearby tables came over to say hello. One of them was a major investor in educational tech. Another ran a foundation that had partnered with Brightpath on past initiatives. Every interaction seemed to visibly unsettle my siblings as they slowly realized just how connected and respected I'd become in the very circles they'd been trying to enter for years. Eventually, during a pause in the conversation, my father looked at me and asked the first direct question of the evening. Why didn't you ever tell us? The table went still. Suddenly, all eyes were on me, waiting to hear what I'd say. I gently set my fork down and glanced around at their expectant faces. This was the moment I knew would come, and even though I had planned to stay calm, I also knew I had to speak honestly. I never told you because it wouldn't have made a difference, I said softly. At least not in the way it should when it comes to family. What do you mean? My mother asked, her expression genuinely puzzled. Of course it would have mattered. We would have been proud. That's exactly it, I replied. You're proud now because I fit your definition of success. But all those years you thought I was just running a bookstore. Did you ever ask if I was happy? Did any of you show interest in my life or the path I chose? Vanessa shifted awkwardly in her seat. We were just worried about you. We wanted something better for you. No, I said more firmly now. You wanted me to be more like you. That's not the same. I turned to my father. Do you remember when I was 11 and I won the Redwood Young Writers Contest? My story got published in a magazine and I couldn't wait to show you. But that was the same day Vanessa got into Harvard, and that day, no one made it to the ceremony, everyone was caught up in other things. He dropped his gaze to his plate, a flicker of regret passing over his face. Or when I made honor roll every semester in high school, I continued. But it never meant much because Brandon was in med school and that was the real achievement, right? We were just trying to help you reach your potential, my mother cut in. No. What you taught me was that my value depended on a narrow definition of success, I responded. When I left the corporate world to pursue something meaningful, something I believed in, you all treated it like I had failed. The only thing that ever seemed to matter was money and social standing. Vanessa's expression hardened. So you just kept this from us all these years? Let us think you were struggling while secretly running a tech company? That feels a little misleading. I didn't lie, I said. I just didn't bring it up. I wanted to see if I'd be respected for who I am, not just for what I've achieved or how much I earn. That's not fair, Brandon said. You set things up in a way we didn't fully understand at the time. Maybe I admitted. But really think about it. If the security guard hadn't recognized me tonight, would this conversation even be happening? Would I even be here now, or would I still be waiting at the bar, quietly overlooked? Feeling like I didn't really belong at my father's birthday dinner because I didn't look successful. The silence that followed said everything. I glanced around at my family. I saw defensiveness, embarrassment, and on a few faces, the early signs of something more, quiet reflection. I'm not asking for an apology, I said. And I'm definitely not trying to ruin Dad's birthday. I just want you all to recognize that the way we've treated each other as a family, it's been broken for a long time. Tonight just made that impossible to ignore. My father cleared his throat. Natalie, would you join me on the terrace for a minute? I think we need to talk, just the two of us. As I stood up to follow him, I caught the mixed emotions on my siblings' faces. Vanessa looked defensive, even a little hurt, like her entire worldview had been shaken and she didn't quite know how to respond. Brandon seemed guarded at first, but behind that I saw something I hadn't noticed in years, a glimmer of actual self-reflection. And my mother, she just looked lost. It was like the script she'd prepared for the evening had been tossed aside, and for once she didn't have a polished response or rehearsed smile ready. I walked with my father to the terrace, not knowing where the conversation would lead, but feeling, for the first time in years, that something real might finally be spoken between us. Out on the terrace, the mood was calm, a stark contrast to the tension we'd left behind inside. Below us, the city lights stretched out like a quiet sea of stars. My father stood at the railing, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd seen him in a long time. I had this whole speech planned, he said after a pause. About how I built everything from nothing. About hard work, legacy, all of it. But now it feels kind of empty. I didn't interrupt. I just waited, giving him space to speak. When did things start to change with you, Natalie? He asked, his voice rough. When did I stop really seeing you? That question hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears forming before I could stop them. It didn't happen all at once, I said quietly. When I was little, you used to say that integrity mattered more than income. You taught me to value honesty and character. But over time, as the business grew and the houses got bigger, success started to mean one thing, money. He gave a small, slow nod. I grew up with nothing, he said. You know that. There were winters when we couldn't afford to heat the house. Some nights, dinner was just bread and cheap vegetables. I swore my kids would never go through that. He exhaled deeply. But somewhere along the way, making sure you were safe turned into chasing status. I get it, Dad. I do, I said. But in trying to protect us from one kind of uncertainty, you created another. We never really knew if we were loved just for being ourselves or only when we measured up to certain expectations. He turned to face me, his expression heavy with emotion. I'm sorry, Natalie. I mean that, he said. It's not an excuse, but I didn't realize how far off track I'd gotten. And now I find out the daughter I've been worried about, maybe even ashamed of, is actually the most accomplished of us all. I shook my head gently. That's still not the point. What I've built doesn't make me more worthy of your love or respect. I know, he said softly. I think I'm finally starting to understand that. He paused again, then asked something I hadn't expected. That medical treatment I had after the heart issue, the one that wasn't covered by insurance, was that you? I nodded. The procedure had cost nearly $600,000, and when I found out his coverage was denied, I quietly took care of it, without ever attaching my name. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. He looked at me and asked, would you have accepted it if you knew it came from me? From the daughter you thought was barely scraping by running a bookstore? He didn't respond. And honestly, that silence said more than words ever could. I'd really like to get to know you again, Natalie, he said after a moment. Not as some high-powered CEO or whatever title you've earned, but just as my daughter if you're open to that. There was a sincerity in his voice that caught me off guard. I'd like that too, Dad, I told him. When we made our way back to the table, the entire energy felt different. My father seemed more grounded, more genuinely present, especially with me. Throughout the rest of the meal, he asked about my life, my work, and what I cared about, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. After dessert, my mother leaned over and asked me to join her in the ladies' room, clearly an excuse for a private conversation. Once we were alone, she turned toward me, eyes misty. I don't even know what to say, Natalie. I feel like I don't know who you are. That's because you never really tried to, I said gently. You were always focused on turning me into someone else. I just wanted you to have the life I never did, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. You don't know what it was like growing up the way I did, always wearing hand-me-downs, living in the wrong part of town. When I met your father and we started to get ahead, I swore my kids would have every opportunity one didn't. For the first time, I saw my mother not as the polished, image-conscious woman she'd become, but as the insecure girl she once was, still trying to prove herself. I understand wanting to protect us from what hurt you, I told her. But in doing that, you projected those fears onto us, especially me, because I didn't fit into your version of success. She nodded slowly. Your brother and sister were easier. They wanted the kind of life I thought they should want. But you were always different. Asking questions I didn't know how to answer. She looked at me differently now, like she was seeing something she'd missed for years. I'm proud of what you've built, Natalie. I just wish I understood it better. That's just it, Mom. You never asked, I replied. But it's not too late to start. Our conversation didn't magically erase all the years of disconnect. But it was a start. I also took that moment to lay down some clear boundaries, what I'd be okay with going forward and what I wouldn't. And this time my mother really listened. When we came back to the gathering, Vanessa was waiting for me near the dessert table. So all this time you've been judging us? She asked, arms crossed. No more than you've openly judged me, I answered. She winced a little, caught off guard by the honesty. I've worked hard for my success, she said. I've earned where I am. I've never questioned your work ethic, Vanessa. What I've questioned is the way you measure success and people only by external things. Oh, please. That's rich coming from the secret millionaire, she said, though her tone lacked its usual bite. It's not about how much money I have, I told her. It's about how you treated me when you thought I had nothing. You could have still shown interest, still cared about my happiness. But instead I felt like something you needed to manage or explain away. She went quiet for a few seconds. Then to my surprise she said, I've been jealous of you. It clearly wasn't easy for her to admit. Even when I thought you were just working at that little bookstore, I envied you. You always seemed content. Free in a way I never felt. She paused, then added, Do you know what it's like working 70-hour weeks at a job you can't stand? Just because you're too scared of letting everyone down by admitting it wasn't the right path? It was one of the most vulnerable things I'd ever heard her say. Then why keep doing it? I asked softly. What else would I even do? This is who I've become. It's never too late to choose a different direction, Vanessa. I promise you, I know that firsthand. That talk didn't magically fix everything between us, but it was the most honest exchange we'd had in a long time. Her defensive wall was still there, but I could see the cracks, reminders of the sister I used to know before everything became about image and ambition. Later, as the evening wound down, Brandon came up to me. So, while I've been busy showing off my car collection and name-dropping celebrity clients, you've been creating something with actual impact, he said, with a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from him. Your work matters too, Brandon, I said sincerely. Helping people feel confident, that's not nothing. He shrugged. Some of it matters, but a lot of it's just surface-level stuff. And I know that. I haven't handled a true medical case in years. Then he looked at me more seriously. Are you happy, Nat? With what you've built? With your life? The question caught me off guard, especially coming from him. Most days, yes, I answered. It's not always easy, but it feels meaningful. That counts for a lot. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I don't know if I can say the same. I've been chasing titles and upgrades for so long. I'm not even sure what I really want anymore. He gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Pretty sad, huh? Not sad, I told him. Just human. We all fall into that trap sometimes. Some more than others, he said with a quiet laugh. As the birthday cake came out and everyone sang for my dad, I looked around the room and saw my family in a different light. They were still carrying the same insecurities and status pressure that had defined our dynamics for years. But tonight had cracked something open. A space where more honest conversations could live, if we were willing to keep going. Before the night ended, I invited all of them to come visit Brightpath the following week. To my surprise, they all agreed. When they toured the company, something shifted. They saw me fully, not because of the title on my door, but because of how I led. They visited our development floor, where engineers and educators worked together to build software that adapted to students' individual learning styles. They listened to testimonials from schools and underserved communities, places where our programs had helped boost reading levels and math scores. What seemed to impact them the most, though, were the humanitarian projects our foundation supported. Schools built in remote areas, scholarships for students with limited resources, and teacher training for communities that struggled to retain strong educators. I didn't show them these things to impress anyone. I just wanted them to see what mattered to me, to understand how I defined success, not through their lens but through mine. And little by little, over time, I started noticing subtle but meaningful shifts, signs that they were truly trying to understand. 8 months had passed since that birthday dinner that changed everything, and while the transformation within my family wasn't sudden or picture-perfect, it was real and ongoing. The biggest surprise came from my father. Not long after learning about Brightpath, he launched a mentorship initiative for young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. He used his own business knowledge and network to help them navigate the same kinds of obstacles he had once faced. He began calling me often, sometimes to talk about the mentorship program, other times just to catch up and have the kinds of conversations we'd missed out on for years. I think I defined success too narrowly, he admitted over one of our lunches. Watching you with your team, seeing the actual impact, it's made me rethink a lot. My mother's growth came more slowly and more hesitantly. Her need to maintain a certain image had been ingrained for decades. But even she started to change in her own way. She began volunteering at a local community center, the kind of place she once would have driven past without a second glance. At first, it felt like something she was doing to play along with the new family dynamic. But gradually, I noticed a shift. She started talking about the people she met there with something unfamiliar in her voice, real interest, and even respect. Vanessa, always the practical one, managed to merge purpose with her career without giving up her accomplishments. She began accepting pro bono cases focused on educational access and fairness, using her legal background to help students who face systemic obstacles. It's still exhausting, she said during one of our new monthly sister dinners. But honestly, for once the work feels worth it. These cases actually mean something. Brandon, of all people, made perhaps the most striking shift. After doing some soul-searching, he adjusted his medical practice to include more reconstructive procedures, especially for those who'd been through serious hardship and couldn't afford that kind of care. He still offered his high-end cosmetic services, but the balance was clearly different now. I forgot why I even became a doctor, he told me one afternoon. It wasn't for the prestige, at least not at the start. I just wanted to help people feel whole again. As for me, I was still moving through my own journey of healing. That night at the restaurant had left its mark. I'd be lying if I said I didn't still feel the sting sometimes, wondering if the respect I was now receiving came from genuine connection, or just a newfound appreciation for my success. Family dynamics are complicated, shaped by years of habits, unspoken expectations, and old wounds. They don't shift in an instant. But I was learning how to find peace within myself, how to stand by my decisions without needing outside validation. The truth is, I hadn't been entirely honest with myself either. Yes, I wanted to be accepted for who I was, not just for what I had built. But part of why I kept my success hidden was self-protection. It was easier to keep that part of me secret than risk being rejected all over again. Now I was learning to show up more authentically, to let them see all of me. The wins, the doubts, the effort, the failures. And in return, I gave them the chance to meet the real me, not just the version they had assumed or imagined. Sometimes they met that moment with grace. Sometimes they didn't. But we were all learning. Our family dinners, which used to feel like staged showcases of who had achieved the most, slowly started to feel more real. We still had disagreements. Old habits popped up now and then. But there was also laughter. Openness. Moments of honesty and care I hadn't thought were possible before. Brightpath, meanwhile, kept growing. And so did I. We began launching new initiatives, this time focused on bringing educational tools to refugee communities and developing resources tailored for students with learning differences. The more I leaned into this work, the more passionate I became about one core mission: creating real opportunities for young people, no matter where they came from or what challenges they faced. Surprisingly, my father and I even found ourselves working side by side on a new educational foundation. It combined his business expertise with the innovation coming out of Brightpath. A year earlier, neither of us could have imagined partnering like that, and yet, there we were, drawing on each other's strengths in a way that felt both natural and meaningful. The biggest lesson I took away from everything that had happened was this: true value isn't measured by income, job titles, or social standing. Real success is about staying grounded in your values, acting with integrity, and making a positive impact wherever you are. If the cost of success is losing your sense of self, or your connection with the people who matter, then it's not really success at all. I also came to understand that change is possible, even after years of deeply ingrained patterns. My family wasn't suddenly perfect, and maintaining these new dynamics took effort, honest communication, and sometimes hitting the reset button. But the progress we made showed me that it's never too late to create something more honest, something that reflects who we truly are. That night at Bellagio, the one that started with being quietly pushed aside for not fitting into their idea of success, turned out to be more of a beginning than an ending. It brought everything to the surface, forced tough conversations, and opened the door for real growth. Sometimes it takes things falling apart to build something stronger in their place. As I reflect on that night and everything it set in motion, I'm reminded that when we live authentically, the people who are meant to stay in our lives will meet us there. And the ones who can't or won't, aren't meant to hold that space. Some relationships grow deeper when faced with truth. Others fade away. And that's okay. The connections that remain, the ones that survive honest reflection and mutual respect, those are the ones worth holding on to. Has your family ever judged you based on surface-level definitions of success? Have you ever had to defend your own vision for what really matters? Feel free to share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey from feeling dismissed to finding real connection resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about growth, identity, and what it means to truly belong. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, your value isn't limited to someone else's definition of success.